The story is rather strange because Wasson and I took the potion. He had a potion of psilocybin.
Wow. Hades comes out of the ground with 4 horses. He abducts her, brings her down, and then Demeter, they ask her to nurse this child. And then she says something really strange, and I wonder what it means. I haven't looked up the Greek on this. You probably know the Greek. Yeah. She says that this child is the anointed of the gods.
Translated as the Christos. Yeah. There is a reason why Jews are not Christian. Christianity is not a Jewish religion. It's a Hellenistic religion because of the conquest of Alexander the Great. And so the Greeks were in contact and the leaders of peoples of many ethnicities, and they were fascinated with the esoteric traditions, and Judaism was one of those exotic peoples. Jesus is Joshua. In order to assimilate into Greek Hellenistic culture, they changed the name Joshua to Jason, and Yah-esthai means to anoint with that toxin. Jason is named as the one who has that anointment, and in fact, in the myth, he is anointed by Medea in order to protect him from the fire-breathing dragons. Dionysus is the most important part, I think, of the work on Eleusis.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm with Professor Carl Ruck. Professor Carl Ruck has his PhD at Harvard University in classical philology, and he's an authority on the ecstatic rituals of the god Dionysus. With the ethnomythologists R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hoffman, he identified the secret psychoactive ingredient in the visionary potion that was drunk by the initiates at the Eleusinian Mystery. In Persephone's quest, Ethnogeans and the origins of religion, he proclaimed the centrality of psychoactive sacraments at the very beginning of religion to free the topic from the pejorative connotations for words like drug or hallucination. I'm so happy to have you on. I've been reading through this. It is a must read if you're into ancient mysteries, mythology, Gnosticism, all the Greek mythology. It's just got a little bit of everything in there. So how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
I wanted to have you on to talk about this book, and so first of all, what got you down this road to write this? Well, how did you get into this mindset to write this book?
Well, it's a sort of roundabout way that I became involved in it. I was on my first sabbatical from Boston University. You get a half a year off at pay after in your 7th year, and I decided I hadn't traveled much and I would get to know Europe. So I flew to London and bought was intending to buy a car, and then took the car over to mainland Europe and drove to Greece and spent a semester. What I hoped was going to be a reproduction of ancient life. I thought I'd live in a village, and I did do that, but I ended up actually in a suburb that wasn't far from Athens, and but I did live by the edge of the ocean in a cottage, but it was a modern cottage. But when I was in London, I thought that I would be out of touch from libraries, and so I would fill the Volkswagen with books to read. And I saw in a bookseller's window in London, it had just newly been released, John Allegro's Sacred Mushroom of the Cross. So I put that in the car and read it when I was in Greece. Since I was not in contact, this was before email and all that sort of thing, with what was going on, I didn't realize that it was such a controversial book. And I read it, and it had some extraordinary ideas, but it also quoted a number of passages from classical literature that I knew, and I thought that it sounded sound, and I would follow up on them. When I came back, it had to do with the role of drugs in antiquity, and no one had ever taught me anything about that in any of my classes. But I was interested in the god Dionysus, who's the god of intoxication, and his relationship to the theater. So when I got back to the States, I wrote 2 essays that were published in peer-reviewed journals, dealing with aspects of drug use in classical Greece. And it was through John Allegro that I became aware of Gordon Wasson's work, because it was quite alien to what I was interested in. His compilation of mushroom lore with his wife Valentina Pavlovna, and then after her death, his book on Soma, the psychoactive sacrament in the Vedic tradition. And my friend Staples suggested that I send my essays to Gordon, and I did. Gordon almost immediately phoned me and said we had to meet, and very shortly after that we met again, and he proposed we work on the Eleusinian Mystery. And so it was not anything that I had learned much about in my training. It was a religious ceremony in which what happened was kept secret, so there wasn't much you could say about it. And my teachers never thought it was very important, although it was the great religious experience for most of the people of all ranks of society in antiquity. And so that's how I became involved in it. Gordon announced that we were going to work on it in a strange way. He had invited me to his house in Danbury, Connecticut, before, and this time he suggested that we meet in Dick Schulte's office at Harvard in the botany department. And before Schultes got to his office, we were in the office, and Gordon suggested that we were going to work on the Eleusinian Mystery. And I said, well, okay. And his way of working on it was that we would test the potion before we did anything. And so
wow.
We drove to Danbury after Wasson announced to Schultes that introduced me and said that we were working on the Eleusinian potion. And that evening we tested the potion. And the story is rather strange because Wasson and I took the potion, but Hoffman, who had sent the samples, sent only enough for 2 people. And so Wasson felt it would be boring for Staples just to sit during the session. And we didn't need him as a monitor because Wasson's daughter, who was a nurse, was going to monitor us. And so he offered to Staples something else. He had a potion of psilocybin.
Wow.
And so before we did the experiment, Wasson said the procedure is to observe silence during these, what happens.
Absolutely.
So we wrapped up in blankets. His studio was in a separate building from the house. And we sat by a fire in the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, In the background was the recording of Maria Sabina chanting, the Mesotec shaman. I didn't know what it was at the time, but that was our setting. And in the background was Masha Wasson's daughter, who was monitoring us. She sat in a corner reading the New York Times to make sure that we would be okay. And so we didn't say anything for 4 hours. After 4 hours, I said to Gordon, I don't think anything has happened. And he said, yes, it's been most disappointing. Meanwhile, Staples, who had psilocybin, but couldn't say anything about it because we had decided we'd be silent, he'd had a full psychedelic experience. As he described it later, he sailed with Odysseus. But so we didn't get off on Albert's potion. The next morning, we went over the letter that Albert had sent Gordon, in which he very scientifically detailed what his experience was. It was reproduced in the Road to Eleusis, and we decided that since he had discovered or invented, because it's not a natural substance, LSD, and obviously knew what a psychedelic experience was, if he thought that the potion that he had said had produced something like that, we decided that he must know what a psychedelic experience is. And so we used his testimony that the substance he had identified as the agent for the visionary experience was correct. Actually, the identification of the precise agent isn't the most important part of the Road to Eleusis. And that was my task, to show that such a thing was not only possible in ancient Greece, but it was in keeping with what we know about Greek culture. And that is not the way most people reconstruct classical Greek culture or antiquity in general. The subject of drugs was at that time totally anathema to ordinary classical scholars. And so it was my task to show that it was not only possible, but appropriate. And that's my contribution to the book. We now know that probably it was not the substance, that in the various toxins that are produced by ergot, and ergots of different, on different hosts produce different complexes of ergotoxins. So it's a complex chemistry, but only one of the toxins is soluble in water. And so Hoffman had decided that that was the way in antiquity they could access something like LSD.
Wow, that's fascinating.
What he identified was ergonovine, which at that time we pronounced as ergonovine. It was very novel to us, but I think it's ergonovine. It's water soluble. But it did not produce an experience for us, and other people have tried to replicate the experience, and it hasn't worked for them either.
Wow, interesting.
So about 20 years later, I worked with two chemists and proposed a different way of extracting a psychoactive element from the complex of toxins. You have to extract the correct toxin, apparently, because some of the toxins are poisonous and produce ergotism, a disease or an affliction caused by eating bread contaminated with grains that have been hosts to ergots. And Saint Anthony's fire is one of the names for it in the medieval period. and Saint Vitus dance, the fire, because it produces an extreme dermatological affliction that can end up being gangrenous. And Saint Vitus dance because it also produces involuntary nerve contractions, so that you appear to be dancing a devilish dance. But what we proposed was that you could extract air gene from the toxins, not by solution in water, because ergonavine is the only one that's water soluble. But there's another procedure in which water can break down substances, not dissolve them, but break them down and cause a chemical reaction. And the two chemists that I worked with, Webster and Perrine, came up with the idea that if you had an alkaline solution, which is easy to obtain by adding bone ash to the water.
What?
And bone ash would have an appropriate symbolism, since the ashes would come from the bones of animals that were burnt as sacrificial offerings.
Oh, wow.
Through hydrolysis, you end up with air gene, and air gene is LSA, which is very similar to LSH. LSA is the same chemical in LSH, the same chemical that is psychoactive in the Morning Glory, Ololiqui sacrament. Right. And so we proposed that. What we did not propose was extracting something with alcohol, because you could also make an extraction of a toxin from the complex with alcohol. But the myth prohibits wine, and so we assumed that was a clear indication that this was something other than that. But other people have proposed that it was actually alcohol that extracted the agent. The precise identity is not that important. The importance is that this great religious experience that lasted for 1,000 years in antiquity, and was experienced by people of all ranks, including all of the people we admire as the pillars of Greek art and literature. They had this as an experience and testified that it was the overwhelming experience of a lifetime. Yeah. And it's important also because Christianity, which replaced the paganism of classical antiquity, Greco-Roman antiquity, was probably a supplanting of a similar mystery experience originally.
Do you think, okay, so I have a lot of questions. That's a fascinating story, by the way. So first of all, let's start with the mystery. Let's start with the hymn Demeter. That's so we can get that out of the way. Just for people who have no idea, haven't read it yet. So Demeter, or Persephone, is a child of the gods. She's this young, beautiful girl goddess, and she's out in the field just having a good time. And all of a sudden, Hades comes out of the ground with 4 horses, and he comes out of the Hades, the underworld. He's the king of, and he abducts her, brings her down, and then Demeter, which is her mother, which is also, is it the brother of Zeus?
She's the sister of Zeus. Yeah,
that's what I meant. Sister of Zeus.
Zeus is the brother. Yeah.
Yeah, she's Zeus's sister. She is the daughter, or she's the mother of Persephone, and she has to go bring her back. So she goes on a little journey. First, she sees Apollo. Apollo tells her, or no, it's Helios actually. Helios tells her what happened. That's how she finds out. She finds out Zeus had a part of it. She gets angry. Anyway, she goes into the town of Eleusis. That's where the well is, right?
Yeah, Eleusis. Yeah.
She goes to the town of Eleusis, and she meets the people who live there, and they ask her. They're saying, and this is where my first question is going to be at. Before we even get to the end, I have a direct question about this one part where they ask her to nurse this child, and she's like, "Fine, I'll do it." She takes the child and nurses the child, And then she said something really strange, and I wonder what it means. I haven't looked up the Greek on this. You probably know the Greek.
Yeah.
She says that this child is the anointed of the gods.
Yeah.
Is that would that translate in Greek as the Messiah of the gods?
It would it would translate.
Or I'm sorry, the Christ of the gods, Christos.
It would translate as the Christos, the anointed
Wow.
one, the
So
Christ.
I'm not.
It
That
is
blows my mind. That's pretty funny.
it is the same myth. There is a reason why Jews are not Christians.
Right.
That Christianity is not a Jewish religion; it's a Hellenistic religion. And in the Hellenistic period, which is turn of the when BC became the Common Era, CE, the world had greatly expanded because of the conquest of Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
And so the Greeks were in contact, and the leaders of peoples of many ethnicities, and they were fascinated with the esoteric traditions of these exotic peoples. And Judaism was one of those exotic peoples. They were particularly fascinated with their secret lore and the religion. And so out of Judaic material, but as a Hellenistic religion, or perhaps out of Judaism influenced by Hellenism, that is to say, esoteric mystery traditions within Judaism, of which we know there were such. The Essene community may have been one of them, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. A new religion arose, but it is not a Jewish religion. It's a Greek religion. It's a Hellenistic religion. And that's why Jews don't convert to Christianity, because it's not a Jewish religion.
So what you're saying right now,
and the Christos, the anointed one,
yeah,
is exactly the same pattern, only instead of being matriarchal in its emphasis, you don't instead of having a goddess and her daughter, you have a paternal father and his son, and the mystery of the Christian religion is that the deity separates himself into the son, and that son is the mediator with humanity, is born as a man and lives through the experience of dying as a way of uniting our mortality with the divinity of the Father. But the same pattern is what's involved at Eleusis, only instead of it being uniting with the Father, it has to do with the dominance of the mother goddess.
yeah. And there's even a part where she's like, "All you men are fools. They
Yeah.
lack the sense to foresee." This is a very matriarchal version of the dying and rising mystery, and
Exactly.
and so what you're saying right now, my audience is gonna love you, because this is what I've been discussing this very topic on my channel for a year now, and so it all started when I read the myth of Demeter of Inanna in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish. I have a Myths of Mesopotamia Oxford Classics version in English, and there's the myth of Inanna. She literally goes down to hell for 3 days. Specifically says 3 days. She goes down and saves Tammuz, who's down there, just like Persephone. And she brings Tammuz up, and what does it say at the last paragraph? It says that they raised the dead with them as they brought Tammuz back up.
Yeah.
So when I read that, I said, there's got to be a connection between this and Jesus just going down, dying for 3 days, and bringing the dead up with him. So ever since that, I've been sort of on a warpath looking for other commonalities. You have the story of Osiris. He's killed. He's chopped up in a million pieces. And then Isis, just like Demeter and just like Inanna, she's the savior. She goes and finds his body. He becomes the king of the underworld. He doesn't resurrect, but Horus is born, and he becomes the resurrection of Osiris, basically. He sort of lives out the father. And then you see that in Hermeticism, where you have the Father, the Son, the Tot and Thoth. Or I do what the Father says, the will of my Father. You see these sort of motifs all over the ancient world, and I love how you started out with this, because it all starts with Alexander the Great. Something, whatever sort of shift in the world happened when he took over, because all of a sudden you have all these mystery cults propping up. All of a sudden you have the Ptolemies interested in translating the Hebrew text into Greek. You get the Septuagint.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, next thing you know, the soil is ready for Christianity.
Yeah. You know about Alexander the Great, and the problem of who his father was.
Well, Amon.
His mother.
So Nectanebo, are you talking about?
Yeah, his mother was a Bacchant, a great aficionado of mystery cults.
Right.
And she met her husband Philip at an initiation into the great gods of Samothrace. So she knew what a mystery experience was, and it's part of the biography reported for Alexander, that he found his wife in bed with a giant snake, which is part of the initiatory scenario. And after that, he didn't feel so happy sleeping with her. And she told her son that Philip was not his father, actually, but that Zeus was his father.
Right, and which is Amon in Egypt.
When he conquered Egypt, he went into the desert and asked a question which we're never told, but we're told that he came back and said that he was satisfied with the answer. And what he obviously asked was Zeus Ammon, the Egyptian version of Zeus, whether he was his father, and he liked the answer.
Yeah, in
But,
Luxor.
but isn't that exactly the same thing as Christ and Mary?
Yeah. Well, what's even funnier about that is that, and there's a scene, and I think it's in Mark. I don't know. It's in the Gospels. Guys can look it up. Where Jesus is there's a voice from heaven that says, "This is my son who I have begotten."
Yes.
Well, if you read the Greek Alexander romance, he goes into Egypt. He meets the oracle. He goes to the oracle. Just sort of, it's like a baptism thing. He's like sort of like a shift in his world, and all of a sudden you get a voice saying, "This is my son who I've begotten," and it's Ammon, who is also known as Zeus.
Yes.
But this is the Egyptian version. But I just thought that he was the first son of God archetype like figure.
Yeah.
And he was even worshipped for like 200 years after that in Egypt by the Ptolemies.
Yeah.
The Ptolemies, when he died, the Ptolemies intercepted his funeral. He had this giant house on wheels going back to Macedonia by Perdiccas, I think it was. And then Ptolemy was like, "Nah, man, I'm taking that." And he just went and got it and brought it back to Egypt. And then they battled, and then Perdiccas got killed. And that's the end of Perdiccas.
Yeah.
And so these stories are mind blowing, because what you have now is you have this clear representation of like these men becoming gods on earth and being worshipped, and there's cults in their names, and they die, but people still worship them, and they had these big temples and this like that. To me, is the start of what happens, and later on when you see Christianity evolve. I mean, even when I look at the story of Vespasian walking in the temple of Egypt, and all of a sudden he said, well, this is what, according to Tacitus, who knows if this is true or not. Obviously, it's probably not true. But the story goes that he's in the temple, and some guy walks up to him with no leg. He touches the guy's leg, and the guy's leg heals back, grows back out of his limb. And then another person walks up, and he spits in his eyes, and then his eyes are healed. Yeah. So that tells me that there was a longing, there was a popularity in the air for some sort of healer savior, like Asclepius type of character, which became Jesus.
Foreign ethnicities change their given names so that they're easier to assimilate into the dominant culture. and the name of Jesus is Joshua,
Right.
and people who were named Joshua, in order to assimilate into Greek Hellenistic culture, they changed the name Joshua to Jason. And Jason is the Greek hero.
From the Argonautica.
Yeah, the Argonautica, the golden fleece, the magical substance, the quest for probably the sacred sacrament, and he's named Joshua's or Jesus's. They changed their name to Jason, and as it turns out, Jason is an exact equivalent of Christos. He's named for the fact that he was anointed with the toxin, the drug. The eos is the word for toxin, an aerotoxin, both an arrow and the toxin on the arrow. And ya esthai means to anoint with that toxin. Jason is named as one who has that anointment. And in fact, in the myth, he is anointed by Medea in order to protect him from the fire-breathing dragons when he gets the golden fleece.
So where does this anointed savior idea come from? Where do you have you ever thought about that? Because it seems to be that why. I guess another question would be, why did the savior have to be anointed? Because all the anointment is you're putting some sort of oil on them. Why do they have to do that? What's the point of that?
It's a fundamental concept that you are what you eat. If you eat apples, you turn into an apple, whatever. And smearing the substance on your skin makes you, it's like covering yourself with the fleece of the golden ram, or with the essence of the golden apple, or with the toxin, which would in fact be absorbed through the skin, that makes you the living anthropomorphism of the sacred drug.
And so is that also with like Osiris? I think Attis too. They call him the dead god.
Yeah,
He's sort of like, they're like sort of mummies. They're like being anointed. They're like, it's like when you put mummy or oil over a dead body to preserve it. Is that sort of another thing? Is there like being protected from death? Is that like similar? Yeah, that makes sense. That's really fascinating. And then another thing I wanted to bring up is that in the mysteries in your book, it talks about there's this really peculiar part. It's one verse. It almost doesn't even make sense why it's there. But I when I saw it, a light bulb went off, and it's I think it's Helios telling Demeter. He says, "Don't worry, your son Adonis, who's a ruler of many, or your brother Adonis, who's ruler of many, he can help you out," or something along those lines. Yeah. And do you want to clarify that for me? I think I got that wrong. Is that what he says?
Yeah, the myth, going back to Demeter when she takes the mystery child and the job of nursing it, and the child seems to be growing marvelously, but she has a special way of nursing it.
Right.
She feeds it from her breast during the daytime, but at night she burns him in the hearth. And although the child is marvelously growing, the mother and her daughters become suspicious,
right.
And they spy on Demeter in the evening, in the night, when instead of feeding the child, she's burning him. And why is she burning him? Because she intends to make him immortal.
Right.
To be immortal means you have to be dematerialized. The incarnation is a sin. It's when the spirit becomes trapped in the physicality of matter, is what the incarnation is. In Christianity, incarnation is the precedent for excarnation. The Christians believe that death is not important, but actually to be looked forward to. because the spirit will be released from the body and can return to immortality. And this is what Demeter is doing. She is trying to undo the incarnation. The incarnation, when she feeds it with matter. At night, she intends to make him immortal, so she burns off the mortality. But the mother and her daughters don't understand this mystery of excarnation. And so Demeter says that she's done all she can, but she will not tend the child anymore. He's going to have to be mortal. The most he can be is a great mortal. And that is exactly what our situation is. We know that existence is futile because it's temporary, or at least this material existence is futile. We will be excarnated, and if there is a living essence to the living principle of the spirit, we do have a kind of immortality. But that doesn't mean to say that being human is unimportant. In our passage through humanity, we have the opportunity to be great in one way or the other, or to be evil in one way or the other. And those of us that choose the higher path, it means nothing in the totality of the cosmos, whether we do something great and are good, or do something bad, because the universe, the cosmos, is immoral. But we as humans have the opportunity to say, no, I don't like it that way. I can conceive of something better. I can make art, I can make music, I can write poetry, I can build buildings, I can build societies, I can build nations.
Yeah.
I do. I leave the testimony to the cosmos that I was here. I don't care what the rest of matter encounters, but I have been here.
Right, and that's
your identity.
Something really profound about that. And another thing, I want to get back to this part and later, because I want to touch on my DMT experience and what it did for me. But I still want to just want to touch up on a few things with the myth first. This myth is so fascinating. Yeah. And the part where Helios, he says to her, goddess, she's lamenting because she just lost Persephone. And this is the part I don't understand. I just want to try to figure out what this means, because there's a reason why I'm asking. Well, anyways, I'll just tell you what it is. So Helios tells her, goddess, cease your great lament. You need not have such wrath. Adonis, the ruler of many, is your own brother and is not unfitting husband among the immortals for your daughter. And now the reason why I thought about this is because when you go back to the Inanna myth, what's his name? Tammuz seems to be the equivalent of Adonis. And yes. What exactly is the significance of this sort of peculiar character, this Adonis?
Adonis, Adonaios, and various versions on it. It's not a name; it's a title. It just means Lord.
Right.
And the overwhelming drive of our myth-making fantasy is to mediate opposites, and the greatest opposites are between male versus female sexuality, and between the eternal deities and deities that die, or between eternal existence and death. And anything that mediates those great divisions is a overwhelming story. And the Eleusinian Mystery is an example of that mediation. Demeter and her daughter Persephone are essentially the same persona.
Right.
But Persephone, as the daughter of Zeus, and who is immortal, an Olympian deity, and of Demeter, his sister, who is obviously also a celestial deity and immortal, her heritage should have been immortality. But that leaves us humans who mediate between life and death with no paradigm. Instead, she's abducted to the underworld by Zeus's brother Hades and has a child by him. And that child is death, but death that has changed its valence. Instead of being fearful, its death is your friend. Personification of the great plan which mediates between life and death. And so she, as a figure, spends half of her time in the underworld with death and her husband, Hades, and half of the time with her mother, an Olympian, mediating between the two experiences of our humanity, our existence as living beings, and our knowledge of the fact that we are destined to die. And so it mediates that great anxiety that we as humans, as men, feel.
So let me ask you this. In Revelation, towards the end, I don't have the verse on me right now, but I'll just flash on the screen during the edit. There's a verse that says that Hades and death gave up their dead. Now, what is that doing? It's in the middle of nowhere, in this long, weird, dreamlike Bible book, which is Revelation, Apocalypse. All of a sudden, they're like, by the way, Hades gave up its dead, and death gave up its dead. Wait a minute, aren't those characters from Greek mythology? What are they doing here?
At the end of time, and we have to realize that time is an illusion.
Right.
We now know that it's variable depending on speed and so on. And so the future is the past is the future. Time is an illusion. But at the end of time, which means when the clock stops and you stop this illusion of temporal progression, the graves will open and there will be one reunion.
It's like when all the black holes suck up each other and there's nothing left. Then there's just going to be something else after that or something. Like, you know what I mean? I always think about that. Like when people die, they don't actually go anywhere. They're actually gone, but they don't know they're dead. That's going to feel like a split second between the time you die and the time the universe ends and the last black hole sucks up the other black hole. And then there's nothing. That's the moment where all this, you know what I mean? That's the thing you hope for.
Because you never realize the moment you fall asleep.
Yeah, so you could be dead for 10,000 billion gajillion zillion years, and who knows what happens in the universe at that point. There could be some sort of consciousness memory machine that can just reprogram everything and bring it all back. Like, who knows? Like, that's why I don't even worry about that stuff. And the reason why I got to that thought process, like, I'm not a theist or anything. I'm not like but by definition, I guess I'm atheist, but the reason why I feel like that, like I don't worry about that, is my DMT experience. I told some people this. I had a video about this. When I was like 19, I tried DMT, and I'm not kidding. I've tried it a bunch of times before this, and it was just always like, you know, it was pretty fun. I had a good experience, felt good, you know, whatever. But this one particular time stands out, and I'll never forget it. And I was by myself. I had a vaporizer pen. And I was, you know, one of these actually. One of these. And I just, you know, packed it up with some DMT and whatever. I had a couple hours to burn. Next thing I know, there was this giant figure. It looked like smoke. And it had like shapes and colors circling its head like it was revolving around it like planets. And it flew up to me. It looked like Brahma. It had heads that were turning in a million directions. It had a million heads, had a million arms, had a million legs. It was spinning in every direction, and it was going everywhere. It was like a clockwork thing. And it flew up to me, and I had like a telepathic conversation with it, which I can't remember. I don't remember what it was. But I remember there was no voicing, no talking. My mouth wasn't moving. Its mouth wasn't moving. But we were having like this telepathic mind-to-mind conversation. Maybe it was all in my head. I don't know. Either way, it changed the world. That particular moment, that's my BCAD moment of my life. I always tell people that was it. And that changed the way I saw a lot of things. I was like, because it just felt so real. It was so vivid, if that makes sense. So that's why when I read stuff like this, and the mysteries, but it talks about Eleusis, the people of Eleusis. They were doing these sacred rites, and the initiates of the mysteries, they would come out of it in so awe and amazement that they would no longer fear death.
Everyone has had, not everyone, but people who have experimented in these matters can recount an overwhelming experience which has made them realize that they have constructed everything about themselves and the reality incorrectly up to that point. And mine was, I mean, there were various ones, but the most overwhelming was when I came to realize that everything that existed was my own construction and I could change it any way I wanted. I mythologized it as being in the garden with Adam and the Creator at the moment where Adam is naming all the animals and things. And I then realized that I was there and looking out the window, and what I was naming was what I was seeing. And then I thought, well, that means I must be with the deity. And but afterwards, when I reconstructed in my mind, remembering what had happened, I realized that I came to the point that I must be with the deity. And I was expecting to see the deity, but he wasn't there, or it wasn't there.
Right.
And I realized that's because you can't see yourself.
Wow, that's profound. Is that Demeter behind you?
No, it is Apollo.
Oh, that's Apollo. Okay, all right. That's That's not. Oh yeah, I love Apollo.
Wearing a strange hat. And
Yeah. It's hard to tell, but yeah, that's pretty good. That's So yeah, let's get back to another part of your book that was fascinating. You talk about this Mexican, there's like something going on in Mexico with this certain plant, I think it was, or a mushroom, maybe. Was it a mushroom?
Probably.
Yeah, and it said in the book that I think it might have been another person writing. Maybe it was the person you wrote with, your co-writer. They talk about this part of Mexico where they were doing these sort of rites, practicing these sort of rites. That he was convinced that this was the same combination of substances that was used in the Eleusinian Mysteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasson, with I don't know when Wasson first had a experience with altered consciousness, but he did come to suspect, and they may have Wasson and his wife may have experimented before she died. She died in 19 when was it? Mushroom Russian in History was published, yes, in 57.
Okay.
And she died the next year.
Wow.
But they may have experimented together. He never mentioned that, but they did come to suspect that it was a religious experience, and Wasson did try eating Amanita muscaria unsuccessfully, but eventually he did learn about the shamanism in Mexico and mounted several anthropological expeditions and partook in a shamanic ceremony with Maria Sabina, which is oh yes, it was before Valentina died, because they published the Experience in Life magazine in 1957 as the advanced publicity for the release of their Mushrooms Russia in History. And Valentina in fact, wrote a separate essay, which is titled "I Ate the Sacred Mushroom." So they did have the experience.
Wow. Another thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and but with other substances, there were psilocybin mushrooms in Mesoamerica. But finally, Wasson discovered in Ojibwe, an Anishinaabe shaman, who initiated him with Amanita muscaria. It's hard to manage Amanita muscaria. So many people have no experience with it. You have to know the correct preparation, but he did have an experience with her. When you speak of shamans, this Ojibwe shaman, she was a professor at university.
Yeah.
Ethnically, she was Ojibwe.
Wow. And so another thing I wanted to ask you about was with Dionysus and how he relates to all this. I know you have there's like all these mysteries sort of tie together. You got the Orphic mysteries. Orpheus is the high priest of Dionysus. Dionysus.
Dionysus is the most important part, I think, of the work on Eleusis, and that is because it's well recognized that he was a great deity for the Greco-Roman tradition, and he's associated with wine, and people have left it at that. Although we have clear indications, not only in literature, but in historical accounts, that in some aspects of his worship, he was attended, he being, of course, only a spirit, so he would be invisible as the moving force, in groups of women who went totally wild on mountains called the Bacchants or the Maenads. Maenads means that they became mantic, frantic, out of their minds. And so that is well documented, not merely as a metaphor of literature, but in historical accounts. But the literary version of it is, of course, Euripides' Bacchae tragedy.
This I've read.
Most people have said, well, that's strange, isn't it? But here you have a god who presides over an intoxicating substance, which at that time you would call a drug, and it apparently induces extreme dementia. And no one interpreting classical culture has wondered, what does it mean to have a deity of intoxication as the center of society? And it's well known that the Greeks drank their wine diluted with water. The customary dilution was with 3 or 4 parts water. Anyone who has red wine and mixes it with 4 cups of red wine and mixes it with 4 cups of water realizes not only has he diluted the potency of the drink, but he's ended up with something that's practically tasteless.
Right.
Yet that's the way that the Greeks drank their wine. Really strange. And the reasons given for doing this is that they didn't want to get drunk. Well, if you don't want to get drunk, don't drink it in the first place. But that is not the case. The way in which one drank the wine was a drinking party, drinking together. And one didn't go to the party and decide that I'm not going to drink very much, and so you sip on your single glass of wine all night long. Your host doled out the wine in a series of toasts. The shape of the vessel in which you drank the substance is important. Our wine glass with the slender stem imitates the Greek wine drinking cup. The Greeks had various kinds of drinking cups appropriate for different ceremonies. You could have a cup that had a handle very much like a mug, a coffee mug, and that was appropriate for what you were drinking. if you're going to drink something that's intoxicating, that would be the sensible way to, because when you get tipsy, you're apt to not be able to manage it. But instead, it's like our wine goblet. It's even worse than our wine goblet because it's actually a saucer on a stem. And if you're at all unsteady, you're going to spill it. And of course, if you spill it at a drinking party, at a cocktail party, you've made a fool of yourself. You're not supposed to appear to be drunk. So the cup is against your maintaining sobriety. And the host would dole out a round, and you didn't just sip it, you drank it. And then you had conversation on important topics, and then another round, and you continue. And it was up to you to maintain the appearance of being sober, or maybe even the delusion that you'd become more fluent because you're becoming intoxicated.
And Dionysus is like,
but now we know, now we know how much drinking, how much the cup contains. It doesn't contain much, and it's diluted with water. And we know how many rounds you would need in order to get high. And after 4, you're in dangerous company. After about 6, you're quite drunk. And after that, you end up with drunken brawls. The most famous account is Plato's Symposium. At the beginning of this drinking party, they're not going to get drunk because they got so drunk the night before.
And so yeah, that's right. That's right.
We're not planning to get drunk. And so this is the most famous account of it. Alcibiades breaks in, and they drink more heavily, and it ends with everyone having passed out. And the narrator, when he wakes up, finds that only 3 people haven't passed out, and that's Socrates, and he's having a conversation with the comic poet in whose honor this party is given, and the tragic poet, and the comic poet, on a subject which is very interesting, which is the same inspiration produced both comedy and tragedy. But unfortunately, our narrator fell asleep and didn't hear it. And that's the whole point of what is established in all of the Platonic dialogues. What you hear is not the message; it's what you don't hear, which is the message.
The esoteric.
So if you're intelligent, you would know what the answer to that question is.
Yes. Okay. That was wow. That was gold right there. So it's so funny that you brought that up, because right before I read this, I was reading Plato's Symposium. Out of all books in the world, happened to be that I just randomly picked that one up. The version I have is the Canterbury Classics, the big leather one. And what I noticed about this is Plato's writing about Socrates, and they're walking to this party, and Socrates is very strange. First, they get to the house, and then he leaves. But they all walk in, they turn around, Socrates is gone. He like dips out without anyone knowing, and he's gone. Like, where did Socrates go? They're all concerned, and then he just shows back up when he feels like it. Yeah. And then they're talking about the god love being the firstborn. And when I read this part, I remember thinking, I wonder if this god love firstborn, Eros, I wonder if he has some sort of influence on the Christian theology, because they talk about how if the god of love rules, then if the god of love rules your nation or whatever, then everyone is taking care of each other. Nobody's in a competition. In fact, when someone invades you, you'll be more ready to fight because you're fighting for the ones you love. So they're talking about how love, the firstborn, is the greatest of all gods. And then, of course, it gets into the big party part. But I forgot why I was bringing that up. Oh, yeah. So the reason why I brought that up is because I wonder, when we're talking about Dionysus, and he is the god of love in his own way. He's a god of party, of madness, but also like love and sex and all that stuff. And I'm wondering so in the Bacchae, he talks about, he's the son of Zeus, and they doubt him, and then he comes back And when he comes back, they're all like, "Oh no, we're sorry, we repent." And he says, "No, it's too late. The wages of death are wages of sin is death." And I wonder if you think there's something going on there with it, with the relationship between Dionysus and Jesus.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
The, the metaphor for this visionary experience induced by altered consciousness, the most overwhelming experience that we as humans are capable of is orgasm, which is very close to experience of dying, complete release. And it is mystics experience communion with the deity as that kind of cosmic orgasm. You could think that, well, it's sex and it's obscene and so forth, but there's no way that it's obscene because you're having sex with a spirit, with something that's not there, and so it is not your your physical understanding of what orgasm is. It's a metaphor applied to what is this feeling of mystical union, and that is, as I said, a complete release of something like a death that isn't a death, and that's what the female devotees of the god are experiencing. They went completely raving mad on the mountainside, and people claimed they were having sex, but there were no males there, and so and they're not being accused of having sex with each other. They're having sex with the god himself.
Wow.
And this is, I mean, and these patterns persist up into Christianity, which, as I said, is a Hellenistic religion. In Catholicism, at every celebration of the Mass, where the Eucharist is consumed, the priest who dresses as a woman, but not because of sexual problem, because he represents the church, which is feminine. He, in the persona that is the congregation, is married to the deity. That's what the Christian Mass is.
Wow. And
It's
then you have,
an enactment of this cosmic orgasm.
and so do you think that that's
Not that it's experienced that way anymore.
right, right,
And,
right.
and the Eucharist is not mind altering. It's just bread and wine. But that's not what it used to be, or that's not what it is in the secret mystery cults within Christianity.
So what do you think? What do you think happened? Where first of all, I think we established there's definitely a connection leading up to the Christian era. And I might get I don't know if you could take a stab at this. 'Cause I don't think anyone really knows the answer to this, but like, how do you think the Gospels get produced? And do you think it was like the norm? But most people think it was just some fishermen with no education that put together these masterpieces, or do you think there was like some sort of like Plutarch like character somewhere writing this out? What do you think about that?
I think that it's all a prepared story, a myth, uh, that was then reworked and made into the form that we have it now.
Yeah.
That none of the Gospels were actually the letters of Paul are actual documents by a Jew who was Hellenized and who is very fluent in Greek, but the four canonic Gospels are only four chosen out of many, and they were chosen 4th century, I believe.
Yeah.
Because there could only be four pillars to support the universe. And so these are the four pillars of the universe, which is Christian. The scholars can recognize various writers within each of the Gospels. And so it's all been homogenized and rewritten and manufactured tradition.
When you say we say scholars can recognize various writers within, can you give me some examples of that, or is that too controversial to say?
It's not controversial, but I'm not a
Okay.
biblical scholar.
Okay.
But
Well, I mean, the only reason why I asked that, I talk to biblical scholars a lot, and
yeah,
I've never heard that. Like, most people think that there legitimately was a guy, a Jewish person who didn't have, like, it almost seems like it seems like there's something missing. Like, okay,
well,
you got,
I I I I uh, I uh, ex- am extremely doubtful that Zeus and Demeter ever existed.
right.
And I am just as doubtful that Jesus is not a myth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there probably was a guy,
It
maybe,
doesn't mean to
maybe
say that Jesus is not a deity,
right.
but I don't. But I think that the biography that we have of Jesus is a myth.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, it lines up with parts of the Old Testament where they're repurposing it to make it about Jesus.
Yeah.
And like we
If,
already
if,
mentioned, you got the parts of other myths that aren't even Jewish.
if there was a historical figure who then became Jesus, it was probably the bloodline inheritor to the throne of David.
Yeah.
Who had to be born from that lineage, which would be Mary, and that it would have been uh, someone who was sequestered from his opponents during his adolescence someplace. We know nothing about the life of Jesus before the end of his life. That person could have been sequestered in the Essene community where the Dead Sea Scrolls, from which the Dead Sea Scrolls survive.
I think you're right about that. That's what me and James Tabor were talking about. And that makes the most sense. And I think that when they start to write these gospels, and I want to hear what you think, and then we'll close out. I think that when they're actually writing these gospels, what they do is they're taking Paul's epistles and they're formulating somewhat of an idea of what to write a narrative from, but they're also borrowing from Old Testament, even like the mysteries, Dionysus, but even not just myths. I think they're looking at Caesar and Augustus and Alexander, and I think they're saying, okay, well, Caesar died and he was taken by Venus and brought up to the comet, and then the will of his father was done by Augustus. So Jesus does the will of his father in heaven. I think there's all these motifs playing out, and I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the ultimate religion for all religions, and they did it, and it worked. I think it's a masterpiece. I really do. I want to hear your thoughts.
There are two websites that maybe your viewers want to know about where our works are available. And one is entheomedia.net, entheomedia.net, and the other is watsonwest.org.
Put that in the description too, so everyone can check it out.
Yeah.
And what exactly is are we getting ourselves into now? What's this about?
But Watson West is an organization to preserve the heritage, literary heritage, and continue the research that Watson began.
Oh
And
wow, that's amazing.
where the Watson and my archives will be housed in a earthship in the desert outside of Taos, New Mexico.
Wow. Well, I definitely want to get you back on here a lot more and have some more of these conversations because I think that your research sort of is in the direction that I think makes the most sense. And
Yeah.
I think that's the missing link to all these mysteries. We didn't even get into the Soma, the Vedas, or any of that. That can be for next time because that's a whole other
Yeah.
thing right there. And I think that's the missing link. I think that's where all these mysteries come from. There's a hallucinogenic experience, and they lost that, and religion sort of became this sort of like corporate thing, like this sort of like like corporation of put our church in that kingdom and one over there and make them all run the same, and
Yeah.
it just sort of got staled out that way. But it would have been a lot better if they just kept things the way they were, and I think people would still be doing religion right now if they did that. It gives people a purpose and experience and something that changes the way they see the universe and life and all that. But yeah, this book is great. I just got the Apples to Apollo. I'm gonna check that one out next. And
you knew about Brian Murarescu's book, Immortality Sheet.
Oh yeah, that's another one. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll put the links in the description for all those books, and I'm gonna get back to you in a couple weeks or something, and if you don't mind, we'll do it again.
Okay.
Anything you want to direct the people towards, or any websites or books that you got coming out that you want to say? Plug?
They'll find it on Anthiomedia.
Okay, I put that in the description as well. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you, and have a great day. And like I always say, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.